All Gaul is divided into three parts, one of which the Belgae inhabit, the Aquitani another, those who in their own language are called Celts, in our Gauls, the third. All these differ from each other in language, customs, and laws. The river Garonne separates the Gauls from the Aquitani. The Marne and the Seine separate them from the Belgae. Of all these, the Belgae are the bravest, because they are farthest from the civilization and refinement of our province, and merchants least frequently resort to them, and import those things which tend to effeminate the mind. And they are the nearest to the Germans, who dwell beyond the Rhine, with whom they are continually waging war, for which reason the Helvetii also surpass the rest of the Gauls in valor, as they contend with the Germans in almost daily battles, when they either repel them from their own territories, or themselves wage war on their frontiers. One part of these, which it has been said that the Gauls occupy, takes its beginning at the river Rhone. It is bounded by the river Garonne, the ocean, and the territories of the Belgae. It borders, too, on the side of the Sequani and the Helvetii, upon the river Rhine, and stretches toward the north. The Belgae rise from the extreme frontier of Gaul, extend to the lower part of the river Rhine, and look toward the north and the rising sun. Among the Helvetii, by far the most noble and wealthy was Orgetorix. In the consulship of Marcus Messala and Publius Marcus Piso, driven by the desire for kingship, he stirred up a conspiracy among the nobility and persuaded the state to leave their territories with all their forces. It would be very easy, since they excelled everyone in courage, to gain control over the entire rule of Gaul. He persuaded them to this more easily because, on all sides, the Helvetii were confined by the natural features of the region. On one side, by the very wide and deep Rhine River, which separates the land of the Helvetii from the Germans. On the other side, by the very high Jura Mountains, which are between the Sequani and the Helvetii. And on the third side, by Lake Geneva and the Rhone River, which separates our province from the Helvetii. These circumstances made it so that they wandered less widely and could less easily make war on their neighbors, which, from their perspective, caused great distress to men eager for battle. However, because of the multitude of people and the glory of war and bravery, they thought they had narrow boundaries, which extended 240 miles in length and 180 in width. Moved by these things and influenced by the authority of Orgetorix, they decided to prepare those things which pertained to setting out, to buy up the greatest possible number of draft animals and wagons, to make the largest possible amount of seed, so that a supply of grain might be on the journey, to confirm peace and friendship with the neighboring states. For accomplishing these things, they judged 2 years to be sufficient for themselves. They confirmed the expedition by law for the 3rd year. Orgetorix was chosen to accomplish these things. He takes on a mission to the states. During this journey, he persuades Casticus, the son of Catamantiloides, a Sequanian, whose father had held the kingship among the Sequani for many years and had been called a friend by the Senate of the Roman people, to seize the kingship in his state, which his father had held before. Likewise, he persuades Dumnorix, a Haduan, the brother of Diviciacus, who at that time held the leadership in the state and was very acceptable to the common people, to attempt the same, and he gives him his own daughter in marriage. He proves to them that it would be very easy for them to accomplish their attempts because he himself, about to obtain the command of his own state, would support them with his forces and army. There was no doubt that the Helvetii were the most powerful in all of Gaul. He confirms that he would win kingdoms for them with his forces and army. Persuaded by this speech, they give each other their trust and an oath, and, with the kingship seized, they hope that they might gain control over all of Gaul through the 3 most powerful and firmest nations. This matter was disclosed to the Helvetii through an informer. According to their customs, they compelled Orgetorix to plead his case in chains. The penalty that followed a conviction was that he should be burned by fire. On the day appointed for the pleading of the case, Orgetorix gathered his whole household for the trial, about 10,000 people from all sides, and he also brought together all his clients and debtors, of whom he had a great number. Through them, he managed to avoid pleading his case. when the state, incited by this incident, tried to enforce its authority with arms, and the magistrates were collecting a multitude of people from the fields, Orgetorix died, and there is no lack of suspicion among the Helvetii that he himself brought about his own death. After his death, nevertheless, the Helvetii tried to carry out what they had decided, that is, to leave their territories. When they thought that they were now prepared for this undertaking, they burned all their towns, about 12 in number, and their villages, about 400, and the rest of their private buildings. They burn all the grain, except what they are about to carry with them, so that with the hope of a return home removed, they might be more ready to undergo all dangers. They order each person to bring out from his house a supply of processed food for 3 months. They persuade the Rorasi, the Tulindi, and the Letabrigi, their neighbors, to adopt the same plan, having used the same strategy, burning their towns and villages. Along with them, they set out. They also admit the Boii, who had dwelled beyond the Rhine, crossed into Noricum, and were besieging Nerea, as allies after they had been received back. There were altogether 2 routes by which they could leave their home. One through the Sequani, narrow and difficult, between Mount Jura and the Rhone River, where barely 1 wagon at a time could be led, and a very high mountain overhung, making it easy for very few to hinder them. The other through our province, much easier and more convenient, because the Rhone River flows between the territories of the Helvetii and the recently pacified Allobroges, and is fordable in several places. The last town of the Allobroges and the nearest to the borders of the Helvetii is Geneva. From that town, a bridge extends to the Helvetii. They thought they could either win over the Allobroges, as they seemed not yet well disposed toward the Roman people, or force them to allow them to go through their territories. After all things were prepared for the departure, they declare a day on which all should assemble at the bank of the Rhone. This day was the 5th day before the calends of April, in the consulship of Lucius Piso and Aulus Gabinius. When it was reported to Caesar that they were attempting to march through our province, he hastened to depart from the city, and by the quickest possible routes, advanced into further Gaul, reaching Geneva. He ordered the maximum possible number of soldiers for the whole province. There was only 1 legion altogether in further Gaul, and commanded the bridge at Geneva to be cut down. When the Helvetii were informed about his arrival, they sent the most distinguished envoys of the state to him. Nemeus and Vericloetius held the chief position in this embassy. They were to say to him that they were inclined to make their journey through the province without causing any harm, because they had no other route. They requested that he grant them permission to do this according to his will. Caesar, because he remembered that Lucius Cassius, the consul, had been killed and his army routed and sent under the yoke by the Helvetii, did not think it should be granted.
Nor was he of opinion that men of hostile disposition, if an opportunity of marching through the province were given them, would abstain from outrage and mischief. Yet, in order that a period might intervene until the soldiers whom he had ordered to be furnished should assemble, he replied to the ambassadors that he would take time to deliberate. If they wanted anything, they might return on the day before the Ides of April.